All right, everyone, it is official. Trump has just tariffed the entire world. And today we're going to get into what the tariffs are, what they specifically mean, and some of the details around how the tariffs were calculated, which was very controversial. But before we get in all that, I want to level set a little bit. Firstly, I've said it before, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you what's going to happen. What I can do is talk about some of the things that might happen so that you're better prepared for it. Number two, this situation is developing extremely rapidly. I mean, by the time I record this, edit it, and then post it on YouTube for all of you to watch, many new things could have happened. There's so much that has happened over the past few days. And so really my goal with this video, and my goal with Wealth Potion overall, as you know, is to distill these very complex events into very easy, simple, and fun terms so that you know what's going on and you can adjust your investments accordingly. So I'm gonna do my best to do that, but it's very possible that I miss out on certain details or I post this video and then things completely change. So I just wanna put that out there. My goal is to provide you the signal in the noise. So without further ado, let's dive in. So what just happened? On April 2nd, Trump declared Liberation Day. He calls it this because he sees it as liberating the American economy from the shackles of globalization. In other words, Trump's tariffs mark a notable shift away from a globalized world of free trade and multinational institutions and toward a more isolationist view of the world, which is America first, as he puts it. Now, to be clear, we're not going to get into the normative arguments of is this a good idea or is this going to work? If there's interest in me steel manning the Trump point of view, I'm happy to do that. But there is plenty of evidence right now, especially in the stock market and in the reaction overall by investors and the news media, that there are a lot of problems with this approach. So first, let's talk about the tariffs themselves. Trump just announced tariffs on practically every country. I mean, there were some interesting omissions from the list of countries that have tariffs on them. For example, Canada and Mexico already have some tariffs that Trump announced earlier in his term, so they weren't mentioned. But almost every country in the world has been tariffed, including some nations that are uninhabited by humans. We're not going to go through every single one of these tariffs, obviously, but here are some of the key highlights. Firstly, there's a universal minimum 10% tariff. So even if there was a country that didn't have tariffs on the United States, or quite frankly, the United States didn't have any trade deficit with, which we're going to get into in a moment, it didn't really matter to Trump. There is a 10% tariff regardless of your trade balance with the United States. China was a very big target of these tariffs. There is a 34% tariff on China, and it's honestly not super clear as of me recording this video if that is on top of the existing tariffs that Trump implemented in his first term. If anyone recalls, if you were following US politics at the time, Trump enacted tariffs that range from about 10% to 25% on a variety of industries, such as Chinese steel. And so it's unclear if this is going to be 34% on top of that, or if the 34% is going to override the existing tariffs. But needless to say, 34% is an increase from whatever tariffs existed in the past on China. There's also a 20% tariff on EU goods, which really is a signal here to me that allies are not safe. I mean, as mentioned, Canada and Mexico has its own separate tariffs that Trump is negotiating right now, but the EU also has a target on its back. And last but not least, there's been some confusion here, so I really want to highlight this. There are exemptions on certain critical core products. So a lot of people were pointing at the Taiwan tariffs and saying this is a ridiculous idea. I mean, the tariffs are ridiculous for many reasons, but Taiwan being a strategic provider of semiconductors is not one of those reasons, because semiconductors is one of the products that was exempted, along with pharmaceuticals and some other products like books. All right, so those are some of the highlights, but what overall is happening here? I think most importantly is that Trump is serious about these tariffs. For a long time, there has been this narrative or argument building that this is a bluff, this is a poker play, that Trump is threatening all these tariffs but isn't actually serious about it. April 2nd just blew that argument out of the water. Now, to be clear, Trump could still be trying to negotiate. He could be putting out these tariffs to get countries to the negotiating table, but it wasn't a bluff. Like, there actually are tariffs now. And if there is some element of these tariffs being a negotiating tactic, there is still a grain of truth here. I mean, a lot of countries are coming to the table to try to negotiate new deals, but that is a very minor point within the broad picture of things. And so now we really have to talk about the market reaction to this. And You've probably seen the news already. I hope you're not hearing it from me from the first time, but the S&P 500 dropped about 4 to 5% 2 days in a row, which is the single largest 2-day drop since COVID in 2020. Now, why is the market reacting this way? If you recall in the video I posted last week about tariffs before they were announced, again, we kind of talked about what might happen, and I talked about how the stock market has been reacting negatively because of uncertainty. So you might be thinking, okay, well now we have these tariffs. Isn't that certainty? Well, the problem is, while yes, there is some certainty around the specific tariffs that are coming out, there is way more uncertainty now around what are all these various countries going to do? Is Trump going to escalate these tariffs? How is this going to impact global trade? What will American companies do that are heavily impacted by these tariffs? So just as an example, I mean, Amazon stock has dropped more than 10%, and it makes sense. A ton of the top products on Amazon are goods from China. And so if there's now going to be a 34% tariff on those goods, that puts Amazon's business at risk. And there's a really important topic to discuss here within this broad umbrella of uncertainty, and that is the confounding way at which these tariffs were calculated. Again, I'm not going to cover exactly what tariffs are. We talked about that last week, but in short, a tariff is a tax. It's a percentage rate that a country applies to its imports to try to incentivize more domestic production and disincentivize foreign production. But if you look at the chart that Trump held up, you'll see that the second column says tariffs charged to the USA, and then in fine print, including currency manipulation and trade barriers. And herein lies the glaring problem. These numbers are not the tariffs that these countries have on the United States. China does not have a 67% tariff on the United States. Vietnam does not have a 90% tariff on the United States. What the government appears to have done, and this has been corroborated by many people on Twitter and is now basically confirmed by the White House, is they took the trade deficit with that country and then divided it by exports. So to use an example, if the United States was buying $100 billion of goods from Vietnam, and Vietnam was only buying $10 billion of goods from the United States, the trade deficit would be $90 billion, and the exports would be $100 billion, which would give you 90%. And that is exactly what shows on this chart. While there is some logic here, I really don't want to dig into it because it's so convoluted and messy. In short, what I'll say is that Trump actually doesn't care about reciprocal tariffs in the exact sense. He wants to balance trade, and what he really is going after is the trade deficit. But by calculating it in this way, and then also to label the column tariffs charged to the USA, has created a ton of confusion in the markets. It's led a lot of people to believe that the US actually is being charged these numbers by foreign countries, and quite frankly, this is contributing to way more uncertainty in the stock market. To put it in a slightly different way, Trump is trying to drive more investment in the United States, but companies that are even considering that are probably looking at this announcement and seeing so much confusion and so much, frankly, misinformation around these tariffs that they are likely not going to invest. They are likely going to sit on the sidelines until more information becomes clear. And I think that's kind of the main takeaway here from the tariffs. Even if you agree with the Trump administration's worldview that America can't keep running these massive trade deficits and we need to start onshoring manufacturing for strategic reasons and to revive the manufacturing economy, you could believe all of that to be true. The stock market dropping so fast and so hard does not help accomplish those goals. And in fact, it could actually work against Trump in the goals that he's trying to achieve here. Now, to be clear, I am not a doomer. I'm actually still optimistic about the situation, believe it or not. And if it's of interest to you, I'd be happy to put together a steel man argument and record another video talking about Trump's worldview and kind of what he's trying to accomplish here. Because like I said, I think there is an argument to be made. I think that the stock market is pretty clear, right? And at least in the short term, investors disagree with this plan. But that's the important point. It has been only a matter of days. And I really like this quote from Warren Buffett. He says, "In the short run, the stock market is a voting machine. In the long run, it's a weighing machine." So to put that in other words, the stock market has clearly voted that they do not like Trump's tariffs. However, over time is when we really are going to see if the stock market weighs these tariffs as a strategic blunder or having some potential to revitalize the American economy. And as horrible as the stock market looks right now, the jury is still out on whether or not this is going to work or not. All that being said, I want to wrap up here with a few action items that you can take as investors. And I think it's really important, especially because there's a lot of panic right now in the markets. As I talk about a lot on this channel, you do not want to be investing emotionally. So the first thing I would recommend is to not panic. Pay attention, but do not panic. The reason for that is, while yes, we absolutely could see the stock market continue to slide this week, and yes, we could see a recession this year, we could just as likely see a quick recovery out of these lows. Trump might change his mind. Trump does care a lot about public perception, and if the people in his inner circle say, hey, this is the wrong move, this could get unwound pretty quickly. And I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just painting a hypothetical here, but this is why you shouldn't panic and invest using your emotions. On a similar note, you should prepare for more volatility. Yes, your portfolio may have dropped 5, 10, 15% in these past few days. How are you going to feel if it drops another 10 or 15%? Really prepare yourself mentally for that, because I could tell you today not to panic, and then a week from now, you might panic. So my point is to really calm yourself, not just in this moment, but overall. And last but not least, this is not financial advice, but I highly recommend sticking to whatever financial strategy you had before all of these tariffs became a thing. For me, that is buying and holding assets that I believe will go up in value in the long run. Could we see a massive correction? Absolutely. Could we see a recession? Absolutely. I will be using those as buying opportunities to buy my favorite assets at a discount. I usually end off my videos talking about what I'm watching out for in the weeks or months ahead, but like I said, this situation is evolving so rapidly that I think weeks and months will feel like years. So quite frankly, there are things I'm looking for in the next coming days that I will absolutely update you on as soon as those things drop. So stay subscribed if you'd like to hear those updates. Some of those things include reactions from these countries. I mean, we immediately saw China react with retaliatory tariffs. And then on the flip side, we saw countries like Vietnam trying to come to the negotiating table to remove the tariffs. These things are happening extremely fast. Aside from other countries reacting, I will be watching inflation data. I will be watching the Fed and how Jerome Powell responds to all of this, because there's a whole side theory around how Trump is trying to pressure Jerome Powell to cut rates. And last but not least, I will be watching the market. And I don't just mean the stock market and the prices, but investors, because there are already a ton of notable investors that are chiming in with their opinion on these tariffs. And it shouldn't be any surprise that most of them do not like these tariffs because it's harming their investments. This is already a long video. There's so much more that I would love to cover. If there are any specific questions, or if you have just thoughts on these tariffs, I would love to hear from you. As always, post in the comments, let me know what you think. As always, I'll be watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.